Why pregnant women had almost no chance to survive Auschwitz. History often records numbers, laws, and battlefields. What it struggles to capture are the private horrors, those endured quietly, inside the human body, far from public view. In the machinery of Nazi persecution, pregnancy was not merely a biological condition. It was treated as a crime, a threat, a liability to be eliminated. Inside Auschwitz and across the broader concentration camp system, pregnant women occupied one of the most perilous positions imaginable. They were trapped between ideological obsession and bureaucratic cruelty, between racial policy and medical experimentation. Their bodies became sites of control, punishment, and erasure. Tonight, we examine one of the least discussed aspects of the Nazi camp system. What happened to women who arrived pregnant or became pregnant inside Auschwitz? This is not a story of isolated brutality, but of policies designed with chilling intention, enforced by law, medicine, and absolute power. To understand the fate of pregnant women in Auschwitz, one must begin long before the camps themselves. The Nazi regime did not stumble into reproductive violence, it legislated it. In 1933, shortly after taking power, the Nazi government enacted the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Framed in the language of science and public health, it authorized compulsory sterilization for those deemed unfit. Jewish citizens, Roma, people with disabilities, and others labeled undesirable were placed outside the boundaries of reproductive rights. By 1935, the Nuremberg laws reinforced this ideology, embedding racial hierarchy into the legal system itself. At the same time, the regime enforced a grotesque double standard. German women were encouraged, pressured, to bear children for the state, while Jewish women were systematically prevented from doing so. Pregnancy, depending on who carried it, was either a civic duty or a punishable offense. When deportations to ghettos and camps escalated, these laws followed. Inside the camps, pregnancy was officially forbidden. SS authorities viewed unborn children of Jewish women not as lives, but as violations of racial policy. The result was a system in which pregnancy often became a death sentence. For women arriving at Auschwitz already pregnant, survival depended on concealment. Roll calls, medical inspections, and constant surveillance meant that even a slight physical change could attract attention. Many women attempted to hide their condition through layered clothing, restricted movement, or starvation-induced weight loss. But concealment rarely lasted. Once discovered, pregnant women faced a series of grim outcomes. Forced termination was common, carried out under SS orders by camp doctors. These procedures were performed without anesthesia, sanitation, or concern for survival. Others were sent directly to extermination facilities. In some cases, women were executed publicly to serve as warnings to others. Medical experimentation added another layer of suffering. Nazi doctors were obsessed with studying the effects of starvation, disease, and exhaustion on pregnancy. Women were deliberately deprived of food and care, their deteriorating conditions meticulously observed. Miscarriage and stillbirth were frequent, and maternal survival was far from guaranteed. Beyond institutional policy, pregnant women were also exposed to dangers inherent in camp life. Forced labor continued until physical collapse. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. Disease spread rapidly. There was no prenatal care, no rest, no protection. In this environment, menstruation often ceased, a condition known as amenorrhea. For many women, this absence became a source of terror. Was it a sign of infertility, the permanent loss of the ability to bear children? Or was it pregnancy, a condition that could lead to immediate death if discovered? The uncertainty itself was a psychological torment. Sexual violence, though rarely documented in official records, was an open secret within the camps. Women, particularly Jewish women, were vulnerable to abuse by guards and functionaries who operated with total impunity. In the Nazi worldview, racial ideology stripped victims of personhood, making violations both possible and unpunished. Pregnancies resulting from such violence placed women in an impossible position, punished for conditions forced upon them. Non-compliance with SS directives carried severe consequences. Pregnant women who refused or resisted termination were often subjected to what the regime termed educational punishment. This included public beatings intended to humiliate and terrorize other inmates. At Ravensbrück, such punishments were conducted under medical supervision, with doctors explicitly ordered not to provide aid afterward. Yet within this system of cruelty, there were rare instances of resistance, acts of humanity that defied camp logic. One such figure was Stanisława Leszczyńska, a Polish midwife deported to Auschwitz in 1943. Upon arrival, she declared her profession to camp authorities. Assigned to the maternity barracks, she entered a space designed not for birth, but for death. Infants were routinely killed immediately after delivery, and mothers were left to perish. Leszczyńska refused to participate. Despite threats, beatings, and the constant risk of execution, she insisted on delivering babies with care and dignity. Working without running water, adequate tools, or sufficient food, she assisted thousands of births. She documented conditions, protected mothers where possible, and openly defied orders to kill newborns. Her resistance did not change the system, but it disrupted it. Of the thousands of babies she delivered, only a fraction survived, but those lives stand as testimony to moral courage under absolute terror. After the war, Leszczyńska returned to Poland and continued her work as a nurse. She later became known as the Angel of Auschwitz, a title that reflects not sentimentality, but defiance. The broader system, however, remained intact until the camps were liberated. By then, countless women had been erased, along with their unborn children, by policies designed with clinical precision. The treatment of pregnant women in Auschwitz was not an aberration. It was the logical outcome of an ideology that fused law, medicine, and power to control who was allowed to exist. Pregnancy, normally associated with hope and continuity, was transformed into evidence of guilt. What makes this history especially chilling is its structure. These acts were not committed in secrecy alone. They were regulated, recorded, and justified through bureaucratic language. Human cruelty was systematized. Remembering these stories is not about shock. It is about clarity. It forces us to confront how quickly rights can be stripped away when humanity is divided into categories of worth. And it reminds us that even in the most engineered darkness, individual acts of conscience can still exist, fragile, dangerous, and profoundly human. This is History on Fleek.